Exploring theology, doctrine, and all of the fascinating subjects in between, broadcasting from an undisclosed location, Dead Men Walking starts now. Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dead Men Walking podcast. I'm your host, Greg Moore. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing with a friend. Got some interesting tweets earlier this week on the Maui fires and working through those, and might do an episode on it. I don't know. Haven't done a lot of news lately, probably in the last 6 or 8 months. Haven't done a current news edition, but we'll get to it. We got a couple people coming up on the podcast too. What is it? Anthony Oliver, his song that's out right now. What is it? Richmond, North of Richmond. Yep. Reached out to him, and he's interested in coming on. Owen Strand, who is a professor of theology. He's thinking about coming on. We're working out the dates right now, so stay tuned. We got more stuff coming for you. As always, you can find us at dmwpodcast.com. Check us out. Snarky shirts like this one here I'm wearing. What is it? We don't say the F word in our family. Of course, it has a picture of Stephen Furtick. Kind of an inside joke. You got to know who he is if you see it on the shirt. But look, I'm not going to go on about all that shameless self-promotion. We have someone in studio. My buddy, Noah Wing. Noah, how are you doing, brother?
Doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here, man. It's always fun when we get someone in studio because I say we like I'm some kind of mega corporation. When I get someone in studio, when the podcast gets someone in studio, because we always end up having fun. It goes a little longer than we expect, but I like it. Now, I go to church with you at Christ the Word.
You do.
You're one of the worship leaders there.
I am.
A very talented musician.
Well, thank you.
And leader, I would say.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I love Silas and I love the other guys, and Silas was over here last year at a Reformation party leading worship. Every time you're up on stage that Sunday, I go, all right, let's worship.
Okay.
All right, Noah's got the guitar. Okay. I like it. You know what I mean?
Good.
I led worship in my younger days, and I know how much goes into it, so I also appreciate it.
Yeah.
People think, oh, he just gets up there, he's a musician, he plays a few songs. I mean, there's a lot of prayer and preparation and kind of coming before the Lord and going, okay, what am I doing for the Lord's day on this day? And then practicing and honing your skill and all those things. Yeah. So I appreciate what you do.
Well, especially, I'm very grateful to Nathan, now our lead pastor.
Our lead pastor,
former worship pastor, for letting Calvin, me, Silas do it. Because trying to take over from what he's been doing is kind of most of the stress, because he's done a very good job. So,
because he's a phenomenal musician as well.
Yes, and he's been doing it since he was like 18. Yeah, or younger.
Yeah, awesome. So, I didn't want to talk too much about that, but just kind of wanted to give the listeners an idea who we're talking to. They know I gravitate towards strange people, comics, musicians, and politicians. Like all the people that people go, yeah, they're just a little strange. I'm like, yeah, I like sarcasm. I'm a musician myself, and I'm in politics, and it's like that's all the stuff that you're really not supposed to. I don't know. They're just those three weird groups. Yeah. I love all three of those groups. So you're in one of those groups where I go, I get it, man. I play music. I write music. You're a young guy doing that, so appreciate what you do. But what we really wanted to talk about was you're also in a fourth category that I relate to. As you can see behind us, too, if you're watching, I've got a lot of books.
You do?
I got a book obsession, and my wife has a book obsession, and I love her dearly, and we've been married 17 years. But when you bring two book lovers together, you now have a house full of just books, and books, right?
Yep.
I told my wife when we moved 8 years ago, I said, why couldn't we get into like feather collecting or something lighter? I'm carrying these books out and setting up cabinets and shelves and all these things. And I still love the physical book. Now, I do a lot of audio, but do you do audiobooks? What do you think?
I do. Audiobooks for me are more things. A lot of people take offense to this.
I like it.
I think
Say it.
Anything relating to like economics or politics, or even things like desiring God. A book, maybe like a book of theology that's more like, here's some steps. So I just listened to a book called Disciplines of a Godly Man by R. Kent Hughes. And an audio book, that's fine. But I kind of think of it as it cannot be literature unless if it's like a P.G. Wodehouse short story. That's like the only thing. Or history or anything like that. It has to be something like, you've probably heard of George Gilder.
Sure.
Guys like him who are kind of more just like dealing with economic issues
Yeah.
or cultural issues that I don't really need to sit down. Not that it wouldn't be worth my time, but
Yeah.
I can listen to it at work.
So I've kind of found, I'm in that same vein because I think I know what you're saying, and I don't want it to sound like I'm dismissive of those subjects.
Yeah.
But there's certain types of books where it's like, here's the 10 things or these type of steps. And it's like, I'll listen to that.
Yeah.
But if it's I don't know, Things We Confess by R.C. Sproul, I want to hold that in my hand and study it and look at it.
Oh,
read it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If I'm reading like a Puritan, or something like that, like Pilgrim's Progress I think needs to be read.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fictional, but
yeah.
I mean, Calvin's Institutes. I mean, you tried to listen to that in an audiobook, you're an idiot.
You try to read it, and I still feel like an idiot.
Yeah,
third time through.
Yeah. So things like that, I think, deserve
to
sit down.
I had that with C.S. Lewis. What's the? Oh my gosh, why is it escaping my mind? Christian
Mere Christianity.
Yes, Mere Christianity. Thank you. Jeez, only the most famous book he ever wrote. And I remember I was in my mid-20s and I read it, and then I got all the way done and I was like, I think I need to reread this. It was so meaty.
Yeah.
I had to you know what I mean, go back through and kind of comprehend it. I just can't do that with audio. Here's a second question though. That's totally off subject. We'll get into the books here in a minute, but if you listen to the audiobook, now this is a big debate between my wife and I don't know if you've heard us talk about this on the podcast before, but if you listen to an audiobook, can you tell someone you've read the book?
Oh, okay. So up until last week, I said no, but here I'll explain.
You had this huge momentous shift in the last week.
Well, it's conditional, but it's So I used to say I have a friend who we were doing a little group together. We were reading we were reading Pride and Prejudice together, and he said, "Oh, I was reading it," but he was confessing he was just listening to it at work. And I'm like, "Okay, well that doesn't count." But then I recently just got invited to be a part of a group that some young men at the church do together called Basic Training.
Yeah.
Because of the last year's group, one of the complaints was there's not enough homework. So they're upping the book list. And so because I'm going through actually a program right now where I'm going to be reading a lot, I was like, I think audiobooks are going to start counting as reading.
They start counting because of the 25 books a week I have to read or listen to.
So it's about volume.
So I always had the idea, and we won't spend too much time on this, but I've always had the idea that I took the content in, and my brain works kind of the same way, where if I'm reading a book or listening to it, I'm getting the same imagery or kind of processing it the same way.
Yeah.
I kind of felt comfortable saying I read that book. And my wife, years ago, early in our marriage, caught me telling someone that back when I was on iTunes University, which is showing my age, when it first came out and you could just listen to lectures and books and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And she goes, "You can't say you read that book. You didn't read it. We don't own it. We don't have it." Yeah. So she's the purist. I'm a little more in the gray area on it. I feel a tinge of guilt when I say it. And most of the time I'll follow it up with, well, I didn't read it. I, listened to it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't know. I think I'm leaning towards if you listen to it, you got the content, you read it.
Yeah. Well, have you ever heard of the Stories Are Soul Food podcast? N.D. Wilson.
Oh, I have. Yeah.
Okay, so their podcast.
My wife listens to that.
Yeah, it's very good. But their big thing is they think of, they're talking about stories, but they think of reading as food. So is this novel or is this book a steak dinner or is it a bag of Doritos? That's kind of there's nothing wrong with hogging a bag of Doritos, but you just have to know what it is. If you eat it every night, then that's a problem. So I kind of think about it
that's good.
Certain things don't need to be taken as seriously. So that sounds bad. That just each book is
No. I know what you're saying. I like that because if I'm just listening to audiobooks strictly, I do feel like I'm losing out on something or I'm not getting the full meal.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I don't have a book in my hand. So you're right. You can't eat Doritos, 3 times a day, 7 times a week. Once in a while, you got to open that book and have a steak.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're talking about books because we wanted to talk about books on this episode because we used to have a segment, and I really need to get back to, but it's just so time-consuming to do a book review on things that I've read and just give people, my pros, my cons, what I thought about it. Not that I think people need to know what I think about a book, but just maybe there's books out there because this has happened to me where you mention a book and I go, what? I've never Where's that? It's not on my radar at all.
Yeah.
And then you find it, you read it, and you go, this is phenomenal. Where has this been all my life? Why haven't I read it? You know?
No, I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah. So I thought maybe you could, because you're a big book guy, you're a big reader, maybe you could bring in some books and maybe give us 3 books that, you know, men should read, or young men, old men, married men, whatever, but just men should at least open up, take a look at, and read outside of the Bible, of course.
Yeah.
And you said, yeah, I got 3 books.
Yeah. Yep.
Which was a great answer.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you talk to people who are coming on the podcast and they're like, well, I don't know. I'm not really sure. And you're like, oh, no, I get 3.
Yeah.
You're like, only 3?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it also
should I bring 12?
Yeah. The age group. So you said like something like younger men. So my mind went to like 18 to 25. So I know we didn't cover that. So I picked kind of in that. I mean, the books I picked would apply to anybody. But
yeah. Yeah. Well, and the only reason I think that, too, is because I'm in this weird predicament to where over the last year or two, I've really started to realize my age in the fact that going to Christ the Word, there are so many guys there that are probably under the age of 30.
Yeah, a lot.
And even a lot under the age of like 25, right? And you'll realize this as you get older. You're much younger than me, but I'm 42. And sometimes I wake up and it still feels like I'm 21. Sometimes you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm 60.
Yeah.
Like, just, you know, physically, I feel that way.
Yeah.
But in my mind, you're like, it doesn't feel that long ago that I was that age.
Yeah.
And then you talk to, you know, go to dinner with some of these guys and you'll make like a reference or something. And they're like, huh? And I'm like, oh, dude, I'm now the old guy making a reference that they don't get from the late 80s.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, late 80s, you know, like, you know, like I wasn't born until 2002. And you're like, what the, you know what I mean? Like I was getting into all kinds of trouble in 2002 or whatever the year is, you know? So my whole point is sometimes we tend to focus on where we are in life anyway. And like when I'm talking to people, I tend to focus on, oh, do you have kids? Are you married? Because I have kids and I'm married, right? And things like that. And I touched on this with Craig a little bit in last week's episode, to where he's even saying, I'm getting a little older. And then you start to reflect back and go, okay, well, now it's you just can't focus on wherever you are in life. You have to look at how can I minister to those older, those younger, and those the same age as me too. Yeah. So I love the fact that you brought some stuff that's for a little bit younger generation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're there, you're closer to that. Mm-hmm. And then we have another guy like you that it's going, okay, this is something that can speak to that generation. Yeah. As much as it pains me to say that it's another generation. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. I love, you know, people go, oh, you got some gray in the beard. I'm like, those are my wisdom wisps. Yeah. Like I accept them. You know what I mean? Nice. I earn these grays in my beard. So I'm not saying anything about like I want to be young or anything, but it's just funny watching it as I get older going, oh yeah, okay, we have this next generation. And then there's a mantle of making sure that they have good sound theology and good sound books and discipline and all those things that maybe either I lacked or I learned from not having that in life. So I don't know. What do you think? Should we crack open some books?
Yeah.
Or you can say something too. I don't have to talk for the sorry, I was rambling.
Well, so reading is something I'm going to be doing a lot recently because, you're aware of New St. Andrews College, obviously.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to be a part of their program. So I have they have a master's program that I'm going through.
Really?
That's remote. So there's going to be a lot of reading going on.
Yeah.
So when you asked like what topic we should do, I was like, well, it's one thing I will be doing like all the time. So
what is it? Not to get off subject, but this because Ben Merkel has been on the podcast a few times. We talk. But what are they? So like, what's that reading regiment like for a master's? That's awesome, dude.
They really to read. So
says the guy who likes to read. That means there's a lot of books involved here.
Well, the nice thing is they treat it. So it's an MFA program. So that's creative writing. So it's creative, but whenever you're getting a creative writing degree somewhere else, that just kind of means you sit in a group of a bunch of victims like you, and you pour forth your political commentary, and everyone's like, "That's great," and then you spend whatever ridiculous amount. The thing there though that's nice is, along with the creative stuff, you're reading in certain classes 15 books. Yeah, I mean it's a lot, and it's everything. It's not just there's a theology portion. The stuff I picked might be different than what you have because you have 3, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the stuff I picked is going to be somewhat, there's a few literary more like fiction related, but then one that's like theology.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So how'd you get hooked up with them? Like, did you just search them out, or like?
So I've been following
St. Andrews College.
Yeah, so I've been following. My brother growing up really loved N.D. Wilson's books.
Yeah.
His fiction. So maybe
Yep. No, I'm familiar.
Your kid, yeah.
Yeah.
I because of that, I kind of followed a little bit of that. I read a few, two of his books, and they have had that podcast, Stories of Soul Food, for a while.
Sure.
Through that, they were advertising this program, and I was like, oh man, I was like in high school.
Right.
I was thinking about med school at the time, and quickly realized I was not a science guy. But at that time, I remember I was just like, man, that sounds awesome. Like, if I could do that maybe one day later for fun, maybe I'll do it. But what ended up happening is I thought, I'm not going to be able to do that, though, because I don't know how much money it is. They're not a government school, so it's harder to pay, But what ended up happening is I was going to go to a UT program.
University of Toledo here.
Yeah,
locally.
sorry.
Okay,
University of Toledo, yeah. So... which I just revealed somewhat your location. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's so funny. I always say it's undisclosed, but I talk about this location. Dude, as a realtor, my address is everywhere.
Yeah.
I've really got to change that. Everyone knows where I am.
It's kind of, it's fun to lean into it.
Yeah.
But, the program, I got my degree through them, and so the master's program would have been with the same professors. So I had some relationships with them that were good, but I had one that was not great, and she happened to be the head of the master's program. So when I applied, they were not a huge fan of my writing sample. And it's not because it was like heavily Christian. I think I said the word Christian once. But I actually ended up taking that essay, and I really liked it. I gave it to a few people who edited it for me, helped me. A guy at our church who's been kind of a mentor for me with writing and things was really in full support of it. So when he heard that they didn't let me in for a few reasons, but it was mostly because they were not a fan of the writing sample, because they've gotten really woke.
Sure, yeah.
They used to be,
like most universities.
Yeah, but 10 years ago, they had some good program stuff. They had a lot of classics, and there was still some like goofy stuff, like a postmodern reading of Beowulf.
Right.
When there's not even a single female character in Beowulf. So I don't, that's not true. There is, but,
no important ones.
Yeah.
No,
But
I'm just kidding.
no, yeah. But so stuff like that. So because of that, I kind of thought, okay, maybe this is God showing. My wife said, hey, maybe like you should apply to that program you've always wanted to do. So I ended up applying, and they accepted me. So I was like, oh, praise God. Yeah. So I'm like so much more excited for this than going to some public place, because they really take their stuff seriously.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it'll be really fun.
Wow, that's crazy. Isn't it funny how sometimes the things where we go, well, I would really like to do that, but it's, you know, not the right thing, is the thing that God has for you all along. Yeah. It's kind of the story of my life. Yeah. Like, oh, I'll never do that. That's, and then you end up doing it. Yeah. Yeah. So, so you're creative, you're a writer, you're a reader. So what do we got? Let's bust out some books. Let's get into this. Because I'm excited because I have no idea. We have no idea what he brought. I said, just bring some books, and probably I've never even read them. I don't know them. And maybe just talk about them for a minute.
Most certainly heard of the first one. Okay. So, I couldn't find my...
He's like, the Bible.
The Bible, yes.
Oh, come on, man.
Yeah, the Apocrypha. No. So
what if he just came out and you're like, the Book of Mormon? We're like, what? Wait a minute.
Yeah, whoa, yeah.
Joseph Smith has some great things to say, man.
Yeah, maybe.
Those gold tablets, man. Yeah. They were talking to him.
Yeah. So for 1 year after I graduated college, wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. I needed a job. And this is before I got into this program. I taught for a year at an Armenian Baptist school.
Okay.
Down in Monclova, Ohio. And through teaching that, they were desperate for an English teacher. So I knew I was only going to be there for a year, and they had so much freedom. And I was like, this is going to be great, because I have 1 year. I can come in with all I want.
Right.
And they're looking at me like, that's great. You have what you want to do. So one of the books I read with my sophomore class was Robinson Crusoe. Okay. And I read that in high school, and I liked it because it was like a good adventure story, and it was really boyish. It's survival. Yeah. But then as I was reading it with these kids who are very, you've talked about this on the podcast all the time. Very Arminian, very pre-mill.
Sure.
Rapture jokes every day. Like
Yeah.
just like out the wazoo, corny. So
Okay.
I was very aware of that environment there. So reading this book, it really struck me as I was going through it with them that it's probably one of the most Calvinist books, and it's the first novel, considered the first novel.
Yeah.
And it has shaped Western culture, shaped American culture. So
Yeah.
Daniel Defoe was a Presbyterian dissenter.
Love it.
Yeah, exactly. And so
Says the two Presbyterians on the podcast.
yes,
yeah. Okay.
yes.
One for our team.
Yes.
Let's go.
So because of that, he had a worldview, obviously, that influenced the book. And so everyone knows Robinson Crusoe. I don't need to explain like the general story. If you've seen Castaway, it was the cheap ripoff version.
Right.
But the thing I forgot about when I read it when I was younger was the word providence is probably used like 200 whatever times. I mean, it's insane. And the issues it deals with are super applicable to the point where I was getting in some weird positions with students, and they hated the book saying, it's old. But then we would read some passages, and it's like, okay, so what do you think of this problem he's bringing up? So an example is, if you've heard of the character Friday.
Yeah.
So Robinson Crusoe's on the island, and Friday's there, and Friday calls him master.
Yeah.
Because Crusoe saves him from some cannibals. And so there's that complicated, like, racial thing going on. And so I made the students do a debate, like, was that okay or was that not? But
what to call him master? Right.
So I purposely picked the students who I knew would hate to defend it.
Right.
and that was a lot of fun. Some of the students who I knew were not going to like that. And I was I think good for them.
Yeah.
So they made an argument about that. But one of the passages, because I had a different copy, I brought the copy I had where I took all my notes in because I had to leave it at the school. There was a passage in there where Crusoe is thinking about Romans 1.
Okay.
And he's thinking about why is it that God has only had the gospel reach certain places, and he's on an island with a bunch of cannibals. Why have these cannibals not been saved? And he starts questioning, like, okay, this seems unjust.
Yeah.
And he has that. But
big
then,
questions.
Yeah. So really big questions. And so because, the greatest gift to mankind to an Arminian Baptist was free will, not Jesus Christ, they were like, well, it's because of free will. I said, well, okay. Well, why doesn't God save them? And so they kept going back to the free will thing. And so we read through, actually I did Romans 9, a little bit. We read some passage from there. And I just wanted them, I wasn't going to say anything. I was trying to be as respectful as possible, but they really had to wrestle with it. And I was like,
Sure.
You need to think about this.
In a literary classic.
Exactly.
Not just the Bible, but like a fiction book.
Yeah.
That's bringing these things up in real life. Yeah.
So we brought passages and looked at them with it, but I said, you have to think about this. Like, and I want you to be honest what you don't like, and so that was helpful because Crusoe realizes actually, when I got off that ship that crashed, instead of thinking, why is it that everything didn't come off the ship? He thinks, man, it's crazy that I even came off the ship and that anything that came off to help me survive on the island even came off.
Yeah.
And so
flipping your paradigm of thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, he flips it. So there's just this gratitude and this worship, and you get to see the relationship between him and Friday growing. I think it's the most Christian book I've read in a long time. Like that's fiction related. And it just kind of caught me by surprise. Like this book has shaped literature.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's the first novel, and it's like a reformed, and it's not steeped in theology, it's just basic, like God saved me and like showing gratitude. And so the book is not, it's old, it's not like the most like captivating, but it's captivating in the sense of its adventure. A boy's going to love it.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Like if you're a young man, like Swiss Family Robinson Crusoe, like, dude, I was like 10 years old and I was like marking off like all the Hardy Boys I had read, like, you know what I mean? Like, and that's showing my age too. Like that was big back then, but like detective novels, like all those kind of, like you said, adventure. And then the crazy thing is I've always thought, like, when is like Swiss Family and Robinson Crusoe, is the PC police ever going to catch up to them? Because there's some stuff in there where it's like anything now, like if it's like male dominated or any type of masculinity or any type of survival stuff to where there's a hierarchy of like order, like it's all coming under attack, and you're seeing these classics come under attack, you know? And I think to myself, like, man, that's going to be one that probably in a few years someone's going to have some type of problem with it, because it is, well, and that goes back to what we've talked about a long time on this podcast, is we're like still living off the goodness of just this country being based on a very Christian and moral principle, to where we've coasted for a long time, to where we've had horrible preachers in the pulpit, we've had horrible churches doing horrible things, but we're still reaping the benefits of it. That was a time where even literature was reflecting the common, the common grace and common glory of God.
Yes.
Even in literature. And it was just like, oh yeah, that's just the culture, right? Yeah. Like you said, Providence mentioned 200 plus times. Yeah. Try finding a fiction book that's considered secular or mainstream that would have that type of language in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and so for that reason, I'd say it's not necessarily like the sort of book, I mean, it's the book I would like to give to my son when he's, 11 or, whatever. I think for a young man, that I read it when I was younger, and I don't fully, that stuff didn't fully connect with me. And I think the reason why, now that I think about it, is because I was just young.
Yeah.
And young in my faith. I don't think that stuff hit. Whereas now, I think being a little older, I probably read it when I was like 16.
Yeah.
So reading it later on was super helpful, making me think about, man, am I grateful for, like, am I thanking God every day for salvation? Am I thanking God every day for just breath? And you'll get that a lot, and a lot of good guys that we love to read.
But I had a buddy tell me classics should be read at least once every 10 years throughout a man's life, because a classic like that, you'll get a different perspective on it every single time you read it, to where you are in just life, maturity, wisdom, you know what I mean? Like life in general, like what's going on, like there's a different, and I think, obviously the Bible is that times, infinity, but classics like that should be revisited, because like you said, I read some Hemingway when I was, 16, 17, when I was doing a senior thesis, and it did not hit the same as when I read it when I was 38.
Yep.
And closer to his age, when he decided, I don't need to be on this earth anymore. And you're like, oh yeah, I kind of get some of the struggles and some of the stuff now, because I have a little more life experience.
Oh yeah.
So I think those classics should be visited. But yeah, that's a book that I think you could give to a younger man, teenager, and they would get something out of it even in the first reading.
Yeah. And there's plenty of, the guy in our church, I'll shout out to Ryan Beckley, say that he's one of the teachers at our pastor's college at our church. He always thought the book was also hilarious. I never really understood fully why it was funny, but so you can take that as well. There's parts in it that he thought were funny, but I could not recommend that one enough.
And we'll make sure we post these all up too, guys, so you guys can check them out.
Next one, this will change probably in my lifetime, but as of now, Henry V, by William Shakespeare. And by the way, can I rant a little bit?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Floor is yours.
I just can't stand, in the Reformed world, why there's this weird movement that William Shakespeare did not write. I don't know why. I won't list the guys' names. We would probably already know who they are. But different men, I don't know why, like in their lectures or in their books, have like said William Shakespeare did not write his plays because he wasn't smart enough. And I'm like, I don't understand.
Is that a thing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, because
I'm not that deep into that world to know that. So there's people out there saying, "Oh, he didn't even write his own plays."
Well, they'll say it probably wasn't him. It probably I can't remember the one guy's name. Francis Bacon is a guy they always throw out, but it's because he didn't have enough education. So I think sometimes his classical Christian stuff can get a little too far, and people are like, "Well, if you're not classically trained, you can't do something."
Right.
But I think one of the things I love about Shakespeare is it's actually language of the people back then.
Yeah.
And we just don't realize that. And I don't need to go on more about that. But anyway, I believe William Shakespeare wrote it. But Henry V is kind of like his King David play.
Okay.
And that's what I love about it. So there's a lot of famous speeches. You've probably heard the Once More to the Breach speech.
Sure.
It's very famous. But it's just a helpful book. I think it's his most Christian book. And I don't know if William Shakespeare is a Christian. I don't know. But he was writing a Christian character. Yeah. So King Henry is going to fight. There's been a lot of different remakes and films. Timothy Chalamet was just in a Netflix movie called The King.
Okay.
It was just called The King.
I haven't seen it, but I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's his Tom Hiddleston also did a version a while back that was really good. But it's basically just a young king, just recently became king. He's going to go lead England to fight France. And it's been a while. I don't remember the exact reason why. But the reason why the book sticks so well is because it's all about him learning to lead, and also about how does he lead his men who are older than him, more experienced than him.
Yeah.
And also do so knowing that they're going to die because of him. He's partly responsible for that. And so there's one of the scenes that has always stuck with me is there's this part where he puts on a cloak when the army is camped outside of wherever they're going to go fight the French. And he puts on this cloak to disguise himself and goes around to all the campfires and just starts talking to the men, trying to learn what are your struggles. And he tries to act like he's just another soldier. And after he does that, he goes and he just prays, like, God, help me as I lead these. And I'm paraphrasing that, but that always stuck with me. Like, I was like, whoa, I've never even thought about leadership this way. Taking it that seriously where you're on your knees before battle. And just his speeches before they go into battle are just so, like, Shakespearean. But they're over
kind
the
of
top.
lead from behind instead of from in front.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is he's just, like, he's going to die first. Like, he's going out to...
Yeah.
And then at the end, the very end, there's a little love. He has this, like... everything in Shakespeare's on a stage. Like, so you can't... It's not like a normal story.
Right.
So everything has to happen in a short amount of time. But he basically woos the French princess, and they get engaged, like, through that. And that's also great. Like, men could learn a lot from... It's unrealistic because he, like, wins her over in one act. But that always stuck with me as well. Just the way he talks to her, the way he compliments her, and, like, is also a man about it. So that's super vague. I don't know how else to explain it. Shakespeare's not the most approachable for people who aren't used to reading him.
Yeah.
But that book, it's probably my favorite book ever as of now.
Really?
Yeah, I would say so. I need to return to it. It's been some time. But it's the book I've returned to the most as of now. That's going to change. Like, because it was a book it was the first book I read where when I was younger, I always was like, I'm going to go into medicine. I'm going to do what my dad did.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that in high school at, like, age 15 was just like, whoa, I didn't realize stories could do this.
Right.
And so that for that reason, I think it, even if there's probably problems in it, that's why it stuck with me so much. So that's been kind of my and I always give a copy to it if there's, like, a guy going to the pastor's college or a guy who I just think is really going to go somewhere. And I'm not necessarily the perfect judge of that. But if I really, if I really think a young man in particular is really, like, people will follow you, I usually give them a copy of it, and they're like, oh, that's weird.
You're like, read it.
But sometimes they...
Call me after.
Yeah.
We'll discuss it.
Sometimes they do. But, so that's kind of my baggage with that one.
Yeah, it's crazy to me how you look at these classics, and sometimes it's a little unfair because we say classics, and that's, like, the best of the best over the last 500-600 years. Yeah. But classic literature has these huge, like, overarching themes and, like, undergirded with principle and, like, great storytelling. And then you look at some of the Doritos, as you would say, right, earlier, that's out there to purchase now and people are reading, men or women, and you're just like... I believe me, I know there's still some classics in the making now. I'm not saying, like as many traditionalists do, we just got to get back to the good old days. Yeah. There's still some great classics out there. And I think there's a couple people I've had on my podcast that I went, oh yeah, they're our generation of this writer. We just haven't realized it yet because sometimes you've got to let 100 years pass before you're allowed to go, oh wow, we were in the presence of something special.
Oh yeah.
But the majority of it is, even writing in general, I feel is like, I think it's like mimicking culture in the sense that it's getting artificial, it's getting one-dimensional, it's almost dying, like creatives in general are either being pigeonholed or just cast out altogether.
Oh yeah.
And look I'm as conservative as politically as you want to get, and we can talk, I can rally with the Fox News people and the Newsmax people. Oh, liberal arts degrees are all junk and we need to get blue collar jobs. I get that. Yeah. But in the same time, though, I've seen so many churches and so many Christians just throw out art.
Yes.
Throw out, writing. sculpture, painting, music. And it's like these things are there for us to glorify God in.
Yep.
And it's so weird that then the secular culture has kind of mimicked their culture of just, they don't really hold them in high esteem. And it's like, what better time than for believers that who understand where art comes from, Christ, right? To then say, well, yeah, our art is ours, and we're going to use it for the glory of God.
Yeah.
Have you seen, as someone who's really in that realm, have you seen kind of I don't know, it just feels like, even from the creative writing side, it's become very one-dimensional, not a whole lot of depth out there, to where when you get into those classes, you just go, oh my gosh, dude, this is unbelievable.
So I'll get back to the writing part, but if we want to just talk about art, for example, something I'm not really as into, but if you go to like the Washington, D.C. National, I don't remember what it's called, National Art Gallery.
Okay.
They have the traditional side and they have the modern art side. You go to the modern art side and maybe you see like a Jackson Pollock. Okay, Jackson Pollock is kind of weird, but like I could, if I had a Jackson Pollock in my room or like in my house, I would not be disappointed. Like it's kind of cool.
No, I get it.
But
I can appreciate it.
But then the other things in there is like there's just a dot on the ground and everyone can't step on the dot, or there's a pile of dirty laundry.
Yeah.
Or there's a toilet. Yeah. And it says something about society.
This represents something,
Yeah, and then you go to the traditional side and you're like, whoa. Like there's a lot of pagan things. There's a lot of things we don't approve of in there. But at the same time, there's like, I mean, if we just talk about some of the glory of, I mean, you don't want to overdo it with the Western culture thing where it's like Western culture is everything.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like there is some truth to when Christianity comes into certain countries, there is blessing. And there's blessing that comes with its curses as well. Like there's sin and we're all evil and depraved.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like we have Handel's Messiah. Like we have all these great things that Christian men have done. And I would say in the writing portion, it's really bad right now. So I've recently read some more modern stuff. Cormac McCarthy recently just died. So he was a pretty famous, if you've ever heard of No Country for Old Men, there's a movie.
Yeah.
He is kind of one of the few examples of a modern, like a postmodern writer who I thought was excellent.
Okay.
Not all of his content was excellent.
Did he write the novel that the movie was adapted from?
Yes. I think the novel was actually intended to be, he wrote the screenplay for the movie.
Oh,
and the movies, most people would say, like, overshadows the book. But his other stuff...
The movie's awesome.
Yeah, the movie is awesome. It's very good. So if you've seen the movie even, that just shows, like, his deconstruction of, like, a traditional story is more interesting because he's acknowledging that there's such thing as a good traditional story.
Right.
You know what I mean? Whereas some people... I was forced to read a book at UT.
Forced.
Yeah, so I hated this. It was called Trumpet. I don't remember I don't remember the author's name, but the author starts out, we have a wife who's mourning the loss of her husband.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad and it's kind of pulling you in. Like she's recounting, he was a jazz musician, like a saxophone player. And she's like recounting his life and she's going through how they met and everything. And you kind of get pulled in. It's like this weird sneaky thing. And you probably already know where I'm going with this, maybe. But midway through the book, you find out, man, this guy's like really awkward with her. Like they're not, like he really likes her, but he's like super effeminate about it.
Yeah.
It's revealed it's not a man, it's a woman. So you feel super, but the thing is she cheats. It's not, she portrays the character as if he's a man. And it's not a he, it's a she. And that was something, and then the rest of the book was just crap. I mean, it was just like, the dialogue made no sense. The story just kind of fell apart. Like, you just felt cheated. Like, that wasn't like a fun, like, No Country for Old Men thing where the protagonist dies partway through the story and you're like, whoa, I didn't expect that. This is just like, no, you thought that's just what I was doing, and I'm going to pull that away from you because I hate you.
So even in that secular book and with the secular agenda they were going to, they had to steal from the created order of the beautiful story between a love of a man and a woman.
Well, they made it seem like it was normal.
That's what I'm saying.
That's the thing. That's annoying. But now,
is that why it's called trumpet? It's like, nope, sorry, I'm a saxophone.
Well, sorry, actually, I'm wrong. He plays a trumpet. That's why it's called trumpet.
He said it's called trumpet, and then he plays saxophone. I'm like, oh, that's the twist.
Wow. No, I'm an idiot.
Euphemism.
I got that mixed up. Yeah. No, he plays a trumpet. That's or she. Sorry. That's another thing. They twist it so much where you start getting confused. So that one was the most egregious. But there are some good, like Kazuo Ishiguro. He has a famous book called The Remains of the Day. He's still alive, and it's excellent. Like there's definitely some stuff, and he's not a Christian. But there are some things. It's not much, though.
What's that? I haven't heard the author or the book. What is that about?
Kazuo Ishiguro, he wrote a book called Never Let Me Go that won the Nobel Prize in Literature. He's probably one of the few guys who deserved it. So most people, you just write something stupid and, it's all about meaning. He is excellent. So he's kind of similar to Cormac McCarthy where he understands what good writing or good story is. Okay. And he kind of riffs off of it. So it's like jazz. I mean, it's like he's taking something that's more traditional and he's just kind of playing around with it. And this isn't really a novel. Yeah. But it's really close and you really care about the reader. Like he cares about his point. He really takes you seriously. He's going to make you do the work. And it's not right. It's not just kind of like I don't know. There's just a lot of writers out there who just kind of like, I don't know, force feed you and they think you're stupid. I mean, if you talk about movies, I mean, Disney's been losing money because that's what they've been doing recently. And not even the moral side of it, just the story. Like why are these characters on this adventure? I don't know. Like, it's an action movie. We're Star Wars. Buy it. Right. So that and people are getting mad about it.
Well, even those type of movies too, the ones that don't do well don't have a stated story of they're grounded in principles of good and evil and what the characters' motivations are. Like anytime you start weaving like the woke stuff into it, it really dilutes a story and you just go, it's not that I'm, anti-woke and I am. But in art, there like the Impressionists and like, when we came into the Enlightenment and stuff, we started to realize like, oh, all art has to be based in the beautifulness of Christ, of God. Yeah. Like outside of that, the stories get kind of diluted and not interesting. And you go, but this isn't even based in reality. And it's because that's the reality in which we live. This world is his creation. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't know. And then you see some of these movies and some of these books that come out and everyone heralds it as, oh, the next greatest thing. And you go, oh, they're just returning to the basic structure of what literature is, of what storytelling is. Not that I'm taking away from any of those guys, their talent. Look, I've never written a book, and it's extremely hard, I would imagine. Yeah. I'm just saying you recognize it as beautiful because of the structure of what they're using and what they're talking about. Yeah. And we're headed in a really weird place, I believe, in our culture where, when you take away Christ out of a culture, you're taking away beauty. Yeah. Definitely. And we're going to get to a really ugly place to where even our art is just abysmal. I think the world was made a certain way. Yeah. So people are, so there's a weird example. There's a podcast out there I'd highly recommend. If you've heard of Warhorn Media, Warhorn Media, Tim Bailey's kind of involved with that. Yeah. They have some podcasts. They have a podcast called The Bookening that's kind of not even really been doing anything recently. But they have a podcast called Sanity at the Movies. The Bookening. I like that name. The Bookening, yeah. That's a good name.
So they have a podcast called Sanity at the Movies, where they kind of go through film and stuff. And I remember they have some really helpful reviews. And they can be hyper critical sometimes. So most people get mad. But I remember one time they made a point. There was this movie that came out, I don't remember what it was called, about this transgender biker. So some girl, transitioned to be a guy. And originally Scarlett Johansson was going to be cast. But the LGBT, Alphabet Soup, whatever, group freaked out because they're like, well, she's not actually queer.
And Yeah, she's not in our community.
Yeah, so she was mad because she's like, well, I can still support you guys. Well, she left, and someone else came in who was actually. And one of the things that they made the point of on that podcast was, you understand, like, if you would have put Scarlett Johansson in there, you would have been making a lot of guys think, maybe I'm not so opposed.
Right.
Because Scarlett Johansson is
the sex symbol, like, and all this stuff and beautiful, and then you're portraying it.
And it's playing with something. It's playing with something there. If anything, we're actually in a time that's kind of like, at least they're just showing their teeth. They're not even hiding it. So and yeah, I mean, we could go into that, but a lot of times, like, when you play with that, you mix the good and the bad.
Yeah.
The best lies have the most truth, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, so that's that's what I like about the pendulum swing.
Okay.
So your example right there, the pendulum for those guys, for the crazy, woke, alphabet soup, uber liberal, like anarchist, whatever, every label you want to put on them, that pendulum has swung so far for them that they can't even do what would be advantageous for their own cause, because not only they're eating each other, but they go, we don't want an A-list, absolutely gorgeous by Hollywood standard, Scarlett Johansson in this movie.
Yeah.
We want someone who looks like a rhinoceros with lipstick on that has no acting credentials to star in this because they're one of ours. Yeah. Okay, cool. You want 7 people to go to the movie and no one hear about your cause? Great. Exactly. I look at that, and sometimes I sit back and laugh. I almost feel... I feel like maybe that's how Elisha felt a little bit when they were cutting themselves and yelling to their gods. Like, well, maybe your God's on the toilet. Like, go yell a little. You cut yourself a little deeper. Like,
that's a good example.
There's such an insanity to being all in on that and such a narrow view of what they want that they end up defeating their own purpose. Which, Proverbs says a lot about that too, and I think it's the providence of God, and evil can't succeed in that. And we can have all those discussions about people going, the world's so bad, and it's like, in the backdrop of global history, I think we are in a time where it's trying, but we've also had the spirit of murder alive and well for a long time, murdering of children on the altar, children in the womb, those things, that sin doesn't change. Which, not to get into an eschatology talk, but that's why I'm probably a little more mill with a, or maybe even a post-mill leaning. Just because, dude, this evilness has been around forever. Now it's taken the form, even in art and literature, and what we're talking about tonight, in this kind of woke liberalism where we're destroying these beautiful things, these institutes that God has given us to take care of and glorify Him with. But when it comes to art, it's just so sad because it's like something I enjoy so much. And it's such a beautiful reflection of God. Like music, art, all these things, like writing, public speaking, like all these things that take those, you know what I mean? And we're just blowing it up, and we're going, well, we'll let the secularists have it. They own it now. Well, what can we do? We got Lil Nas X dressed as a devil. I mean, what can we do?
That's really bad.
Or whoever it was. Is that who it was? I can't remember. It was.
Yeah, and he also put, I think, like some of his blood in some of his shoe.
Blood in his shoe. Insane. It's like, what are you gonna do? We're just waiting for Christ to come back, and it's like, no, dude. Like, look at the last 600 years of not even Western, but Eastern. Like art. Like, it was the believers that pushed art forward. It was the Christ followers that elevated art to a certain level in writing and in sculpture and painting and music and all those things. I think it's time for us to, I don't know, get them back. Well, not be afraid to.
There can almost be an overcorrection from Roman Catholicism. So, like, icons. Which I think we all would agree it's not okay to have a statue of Mary in your church. But there can be a little bit of an overcorrection where you think, and I think most people probably listen to your podcast are not comfortable with having like a picture of Jesus in the sanctuary, or some sort of image.
I'm certainly not.
Yeah, I
just don't want to form him in my own eyes.
Exactly. Yeah. But at the same time, like if we talk about just like Christian life, like how should you be living? You want to also realize that the way that the world is defining beauty is not necessarily how Scripture does. Right. And a lot of times beauty comes with children, just doing simple, normal things. And out of that produces, good folk songs from families gathering around. Right. You know what I mean? Like there's things like that. But no, we want to have an avant-garde, gay, You know, only we understand this art, you know, and that's the problem is it's not really art for the people anymore either. So, yeah.
Well, and we'll get to the final book here, but you just made me think of something too. Like everything that is secular or that is of this world or of our own flesh is just an imitation of true beauty of who Christ is, right? And you find that even in our art too, to where it's the Doritos.
Yeah.
It fills me up for a minute. It's not good for me. And boy, is it going to have, if I eat this every day, am I going to have some long lasting medical effects from it? To where, you know, I'll put that up against, you know, a parade that celebrates equality for a day. And there's all this insaneness of just being free. And I'm using that. When I say being free, I'm saying in the sinful way of just whatever feels good, do it. I will put that up against sitting in my deer blind, watching the same two ravens come back to the same tree for the last 7 years and meeting each other and making that nest and knowing that they're going into mating season and watching them for 6 hours while I'm waiting for a deer every single year and just go, that even that in the animal kingdom, that relationship of those two, because they mate for life, but coming together, and I've watched that every year. They've mated and they've had kids, but offspring every year.
Yeah.
And you go, that reflects the glory of God to me in a deeper sense, and is more fulfilling in my soul than anything of things that, like I said, feel good, do it, like that instant, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not putting it into the right words, but you understand what I'm saying, to where there's like such a deeper, more beautiful thing when the thing itself is reflecting Christ than when it's just reflecting an imitation.
Yeah.
You know, and we've gotten to that in the arts and literature and all that.
Well, and that's so there are sometimes I think when people will try to use art to redeem the culture.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's impossible, but I think a lot of times what art does is it actually just reflects our culture.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like Robinson Crusoe was reflecting a group of people at that time who really took the providence of God seriously. Pilgrim's Progress, you know, things like that. So that essay I actually wrote for UT had to do with this idea. So I did it on Frankenstein.
Okay.
So Mary Shelley at the beginning of her book says, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but anything I say in this book does not reflect my worldview or does not reflect whatever. So she's saying art is for art's sake, is what she's basically saying. And I go through and just say that's ridiculous. Right. Especially when you look at her life and you look at the way it's reflecting the time. So Frankenstein is an enlightenment. I would have to recommend, there's a book called Monsters from the Id by E. Michael Jones that is excellent. That breaks down horror movies, Frankenstein, Dracula, all that stuff. What is it? Why is the horror genre around? He really makes the statement, and I kind of take his point and run with it off of Mary Shelley's preface to her book. But he's saying it's like James 1:15. When sin is fully grown, it brings forth death.
Yeah.
And so he's saying, you know, your art, he's saying in Frankenstein, you know, the monster is a result of that. You know, Victor in the story goes into sin. He goes into a dark place, and what comes out is his destruction. He created it and kills everyone, including him. Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to address in that was just saying, you can't make this statement, oh, art is just for art's sake.
Yeah.
It reflects something about you. And if you just make this statement, no, this book I wrote that's talking about my life and how I rejected God and I embraced enlightenment thinking, that's really destructive. Yeah. And that's how the horror genre came about. So
my wife read Frankenstein again from when she was younger, just on the beach, not this year, but last year. And she was like, oh my gosh, dude, this like, she was like starting to hate every rip-off Frankenstein cartoon or like movie she'd seen. She goes, this is deep-rooted principles and even some biblical principles in the fact of like negative, like you do this, this will happen.
Yeah.
And she's like, every single Frankenstein ripoff you've seen is just some stupid, crazy, you know what I mean? Like, oh, the monster. She's like, there's some really deep issues going on in this book. Dracula too.
Yeah.
Like the classic Dracula, not the Disney version, not the Cartoon Network version, not like the thing you have on the front of your, cereal box or whatever.
Kid on Halloween,
right? Or the Halloween dress up. Like the classic literature itself is dealing with these really deep issues, whether they're secular or not, but they're also rooted in biblical truths, whether they're positive or negative truths, right? And like you said, the art is reflecting the culture of the time.
Yeah.
And we're in such a one-dimensional culture. Some of our art just sucks.
Yes.
It's rough, dude.
Yeah.
It's like there's no depth to it. And then as soon as we get some art that has some depth to it, everyone's like, oh, it's the greatest.
We worship it. Yeah.
You know, we worship it. Like, even like the Oliver Anthony guy. Like, I'm not throwing any shade at him.
No,
We're having him on. He writes a song, and I went, that's
like
I get
Dylan,
it. Yeah, that's not taking anything away from his artistic ability, but we're so hungry for that.
Yes.
Like, just give me something that has a modicum of truth and based in something deeper than an inch deep of water that goes down to the roots.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh, this is our anthem. And it's like, no, it's a good song. I get it. I understand what he's saying. And he's saying it with conviction because that's probably how he's really feeling.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's like, then let's look to there's classics that have that. And you have to nitpick, but you have to find the people that are writing that way and speaking that way in this culture today, too.
Well, I would imagine, I don't know much about him. I mean, I found out who he was a week ago. So
me too. So I'll find out in 2 weeks.
I would imagine a guy who does that is not going to be, like, he's not going to think, man, I wrote the greatest song ever. Right. He's probably going to think, I just wrote a good song for the right time. Mm-hmm. You know, and he probably had no idea that everyone was going to love it. You know,
no, and he said that. Yeah.
Yeah. So... But at the same time, I agree. People are hungry for some of that, like Bob Dylan, Johnny Cash, raw.
Yeah.
Just this is how I'm feeling, and I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the one thing I did take that. So that essay. Have you ever heard of Mere Orthodoxy?
Sure.
They're a magazine. So they actually took it. So it's on their website.
Oh, we'll link it up.
It's
for
called,
sure.
Yeah. I'll send the link.
Yeah.
But,
send it to me so we can post it.
Yeah. So they put that out, and it's kind of interesting, some of the feedback I got. I think a lot of Catholics were in that feed. But, yeah, it's weird. But,
all right, so let's put bookends on this. What's the third book?
Third book.
So we got Robin Crusoe. What was the second one?
Henry V.
Henry V.
William Shakespeare. Last one. Okay, so this is like more recent read. These were ones from high school. It's called, you've all heard of Banner of Truth.
Yeah.
Out in Edinburgh.
Banner of Truth Publishing?
Yeah, publishing company. Yeah. So I'm sure you got plenty of...
Oh, that's Crossway, but I mean... Beaky is Banner of Truth. He's president. Okay. Yeah, he's been on the podcast.
So, Revival...
Beaky,
yeah. Ian Murray he's written many books, like Spurgeon biographies, different things like that. His best work by far is Revival and Revivalism. The subtitle... I don't remember what you call it when you have under the title... I guess it's...
Is it the subtitle?
Subtitle, is that what you call it? Yeah. So
I think so.
Yeah, the making and marring of American evangelicalism. So
I see it. Let me see it. So I'm not familiar with this book.
Yeah. So the reason this book is really helpful. So it starts with Edwards and Whitefield.
Okay.
So it's about American church stuff, and really the focus of it is on a man named Charles Finney, who most people have heard of.
Yeah.
Sadly, a Presbyterian who is not a Presbyterian.
No. We don't claim him.
No, we don't. No.
Just like the Baptists don't claim Spurgeon, we'll take him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
you
true.
can have Finney.
Yeah.
We'll have Spurgeon.
So it really talks about kind of like what Billy Graham ended up doing. And Billy Graham, I don't really know what I think of him. I'm sure he was a Christian. But at the same time, he definitely took some notes from Finney. So
sure, it's towards the end of his life, especially.
Yes,
like the compromise with the Roman Catholics and kind of a one world religion type idea.
Yeah.
In the last 10 years, but yeah.
So this book is the reason it'd be helpful for a young man in particular is when you go to different churches and you wonder why is there all these differences? Why are there altar calls at this church and at this church they don't know how to sing? You know, like there's no instruments here, and you want to reading this book is helpful. Murray is a Presbyterian. Very much so. But he does a very good job at showing, funny enough, the Baptists and Presbyterians were pretty united early.
Yeah.
And were very Calvinist. And then the Methodists were different. But even then, the Methodists had very good things early on.
Sure.
They fell off the deep end very quickly. So it starts with Wesley's. I could go on, but it's very helpful. Just like talking about what's good, what's bad about American church stuff. Charles Finney, really bad.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, he had some crazy stuff. It's crazy to me that people still extol some of the things he did, because you look at some of the theological standpoints and just like even within Christian orthodoxy, what he believed towards later in his life, it's pretty nuts.
Yeah.
It's pretty nuts what he was doing. And we could go, we could do all, you can come back and we'll talk about Finney for 2 hours one night. But people, it's crazy how you can be reduced to just a name and maybe like one sentence attached to it.
Oh, yeah.
As like a preacher, a theologian, a scholar. And then people just kind of repeat that. And then once you dig into it, you go, oh my goodness, which is part of my story is I always had kind of Reformed names thrown around and growing up in homeschool and through church. And then when I actually looked into them, I went, oh, that's what they believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is pretty crazy. But that's what were the years on that? 1758 to like
1858. Yeah, 1750 to 1858. So that'd be like the end of Edwards.
So a pretty crazy time in American history too, and in religious history, where stuff was just exploding.
Yeah, no, and it talks about, you've probably heard of a guy named Henry Ward Beecher.
Sure.
So he's in here too. It talks about him. It doesn't go as much into his life, but it's some of it's like really like, oh, awful. Some of it's also like, wow, I didn't realize the church was so unified. Like, so there's a lot of good and bad. Yeah,
I've always said like people who want to get into church history, we love the first and second century. That's a very famous area. But like honestly, in American church history, go from like 17 to 1900.
Yeah.
That 200-year period, more things, well, I should say more, but a lot of things happen in that 200-year period. To this day, churches are holding to, and if you ask the average churchgoer, why do you believe that? They go, I don't know. They go, it's because of, right? And then, 90% of Pentecostals is Azusa Street. They don't even know their own history. That's in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
Or 125 years,
Which is crazy. Yeah.
Which is really nuts that unfortunately a lot of believers don't really know their church history, and that's not trying to sound elitist or condescending. But it's like I
didn't know anything until I read this book. It was very helpful. So.
So we got 3 good books. I was going to get into my 3, but we've already went an hour. We're going to save that for another time. I'll tell you what. I'll give you the titles, and you just tell me if you've heard of them or what you think of them.
Okay.
We're not going to get into into a big review of them. But the one that I read years ago, Thoughts for Young Men by J.C. Ryle. I loved that book when I read that the first time. The other one's a newer one by Doug Wilson called How to Exasperate Your Wife.
I've heard of it. I've seen the cover. It's got the guy in the underwear.
There you go. There's the cover. We'll put it up there. And that's just really chasing, because I'm a big Proverbs guy. It's Ecclesiastes, which we're doing Ecclesiastes in a small group this year. Let's go.
That book cover
one of my favorite books.
Yeah.
I have a couple glasses of wine and, reading Ecclesiastes and go, you're right, it's all pointless.
Yeah.
But a lot of wisdom in those books. I love the wisdom books. So that book is more about like men understanding that wisdom is a she and to chase their wife the same way. And I thought it was I think Doug did a good job of like making a parallel there. Yeah. And then this one just came across my desk. I had read some stuff by him in blogs, and then my mother got me this for my birthday this year. Dan Phillips, God's Wisdom in Proverbs.
I've heard the name.
Oh my gosh, dude. And he's a solid dude. I don't just jump into something and go, oh, I like this guy, endorse him. I've been reading it, but really a breakdown of every single verse in Proverbs in its original Hebrew, what it actually means. I always had a problem with bring up a child in the way that he should go, and from that way he won't depart. And you go, well, what the heck? I taught a child, and I taught him, they gave their life to the Lord at 7, and now they're a drug addict, and they're going to die in their own puke. And what's that promise, God? And he has a very, he even goes to that verse, and my mother and I was discussing this, and just saying like, and if you read it in the LSB too, the LSB expands on it a little bit more, but it says it's not a salvific or promise verse, bring up a child in the way they should go. It's like, if you raise a child in the way he naturally wants to go, which is the sinful, depraved way, if you raise him that way, later in life, he's not going to depart from that way.
Yeah.
So it's almost a negative promise, meaning if you allow the child and give him whatever his heart desires as a depraved, sinful child growing up into his teens and his young adult, and I want this, and this makes me feel good, and mommy, give me that, and daddy, bless me with this, and you do it unbridled, then later in life, he's not going to depart from that way. He's going to continue to want and want and want. So the proverb there is saying, oh, no, bring them up in a godly way, because if you give them the way they naturally want to go, they're not going to depart from it. And we know that all sin leads to death. Yeah. So he breaks down these real famous verses where we I call them Christianese. We just say them. You know what I mean? And then it's like, oh, and then we repeat it so much we don't even, oh, your rod and your staff, you comfort me. Well, do you really know what that means? Yeah. There was a rod of correction. There was a staff, right? Staff of harm. Like, let's, So that book is, I think, for young men, even older men, any man, married, single, whatever, read that book too, Dan Phillips, God's Wisdom and Proverbs, because I'm a big Proverbs guy anyway. There's 31 Proverbs, 31 days in a month. Yep. Coincidence? There are no coincidences with God. That was his providence. Get up every morning, read a proverb, and then lead your home, lead your wife, lead your kids. If you're not married, you don't have kids, lead your life to those, so then you can then find a wife and be fruitful, multiply. Yeah. And then so that's my pitch for my 3.
What is cross politic? They always end with the last one.
What is he? Oh yeah, cross politic. Yeah, baptism, chocolate nuts, baptize those babies, right? Yeah. Oh, I love it. Noah, thanks so much for coming on, man. The hour just flew by.
Thank you.
I appreciate you bringing your wisdom and knowledge in, like I said, literature and writing. Those are 3 good recommendations. We'll make sure we link them up. But I would hope this isn't your last time on here. We'd love to have you back.
Anytime, yeah.
Me, like I said, talking we again like I'm a corporation. I would love to have you back. The podcast in officium would love to have you back. But I don't know. You got any final words, parting thoughts before we get out of here? Put you on the spot? Oh, man. You know we don't rehearse here.
No, read books. Yeah, that's my read. Yeah, that we have lost that ability today.
Oh, that's why I like it. You want to know what? I agree with him. Read books, play music, learn something new, get into the arts, glorify God. Guys, as always, we appreciate you listening to another episode of the Dead Men Walking podcast. As always, the chief end of man is to glorify God, enjoy Him forever. God bless. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Dead Men Walking Podcast for full video podcast episodes and clips, or email us at deadmenwalkingpodcast@gmail.com.
None you